Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a truly revolutionary framework for international rights. We usually hear about human rights in a very strict, individualized kind of bubble, but today, we're exploring a legal instrument that completely shatters that bubble and expands how we look at the world. Think about this for a second. What if human rights were about the community and not just the individual? It's a fascinating question, right? It forces us to look way beyond those traditional Western-centric views of the law, straight into the heart of the African human rights system. It really asks us to realize that our own personal freedoms actually rely pretty heavily on the well-being of the people around us.
So, to navigate all of this, here's how we're going to break it down today. 1. The Banjul Charter explained. 2. Individual and collective rights. 3. Our duties to society. 4. Monitoring and accountability. And finally, 5. RNHR in action. Let's get right to it.
All right, Part 1. The Banjul Charter explained. Let's start with the foundational blueprint itself, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights.
There is a massive philosophical difference here that we need to unpack. The UN's International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, focuses super heavily on protecting a single citizen from state abuse. But the African Union's Banjul Charter, it takes a much wider lens. It places those individual liberties right alongside collective community rights and societal duties. Basically, it views you as a vital thread in a much larger social fabric.
And the timeline here tells a brilliant story. So, the UN's ICCPR was adopted in '66 and went into effect in '76. Exactly 1 decade later, in 1986, the African Charter entered into force. It took a whole decade for regional systems to evolve and capture this more holistic, culturally reflective view of humanity.
Moving on to Part 2, individual and collective rights. Let's break down what these protections actually look like in practice.
First up, the individual protections. The Banjul Charter absolutely safeguards your core individual liberties. We're talking dignity, fair trials, free expression, the right to assemble, the whole shebang. Just like the UN text, it guarantees you're protected from awful abuses like torture and arbitrary detention.
But here is the real game changer. It adds people's rights. Think about it. Your individual right to life is completely compromised if your community's water is polluted or if you don't have peace, right? By codifying things like a clean environment and equitable natural resources as actual human rights, the Charter legally acknowledges that the community's survival is just as important as the individual's.
This brings us perfectly to Part 3, our duties to society. And honestly, this completely reframes the traditional human rights narrative.
Notice the emphasis on duties. The Banjul Charter introduces recognized responsibilities that you hold toward your family, your society, the state, and the broader African community. Under this framework, you don't just consume rights. You have a duty to uplift your family and actually contribute to society. It's a profound shift toward a really mutual relationship-based approach.
So the huge takeaway here is balance. Individual rights can only truly flourish when they're weighed equally against a collective responsibility to the community. You are empowered with rights, yes, but you're also entrusted with the well-being of the collective. It's a two-way street.
Okay, Part 4. Monitoring and accountability. Because let's face it, a legal text is literally just paper without a system to enforce it.
That is exactly where the African Commission comes in. Acting as the engine of this whole system, they turn high-level text into real-world standards. They're out there actively promoting and protecting human rights on the ground, supporting state reporting mechanisms, and serving as the official interpreters of the Charter's legal standards.
Which leads us to our final section, Part 5, RNHR in action. So, how do we actually bridge the massive gap between international law and real grassroots action?
Enter the Resurgence Network for Human Rights, or RNHR. These folks are incredible at taking these complex instruments and bringing rights literacy directly to communities and international partners. They run these Human Rights Academy modules, including some really effective African human rights webinars that focus heavily on international diaspora education. They facilitate community rights monitoring and create detailed observatory briefs. They're literally translating the Banjul Charter into practical, everyday education.
In these webinars and workshops, RNHR teaches advocates to untangle complex legal crises using 3 super practical steps. Step 1, which right is involved? Step 2, who has the duty? And Step 3, what evidence is safe to share? It's a brilliant, structured way to just remove the panic from a crisis and replace it with clear analytical action.
Let's zoom in on that third step for a second, because it's absolutely crucial. RNHR places a strict focus on gathering non-identifying evidence. This ensures ethical, safe monitoring for their Human Rights Observatory without putting vulnerable people at further risk. They train communities to use non-identifying summaries, avoid sensitive docs, and absolutely omit ID numbers or banking info. Documenting the violation is critical, for sure, but protecting the individual always comes first.
Because at the end of the day, behind every legal framework is a real person seeking stability. And this quote perfectly captures the human impact of RNHR's work. RNHR helped me understand where to begin when I had nowhere to turn. When people face displacement or rights violations, the system is just completely overwhelming. Giving them a safe, clear starting point, that's invaluable.
And we are already seeing their tangible impact. Since their launch, they've coordinated 4 direct legal and rights referrals. Now, 4 might sound like a small number, but it's a foundational snapshot of how they bridge legal confusion with practical help. They're guiding real individuals out of a state of crisis and onto a structured, accountable path toward justice.
As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with this to chew on. How can the spirit of the Banjul Charter influence how we support each other today? In your own life, how can you better balance your individual rights with the duty to your community? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating framework with me. Keep learning, keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.